Hello, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics, once again in Zoom format. Today we'll meet San Jose's new city council members, David Cohen for District 4, that's Berryessa and North San Jose, and Matt Mahan for District 10, which is Almaden. We'll ask them about campaigning before and then during the pandemic, what they learned from the voters, and about the massive impact of independent expenditures on their races, as well as how they'll work with the current division on the city council. And that's what's coming up on Valley Politics. Welcome, everyone, and welcome David Cohen and Matt Mahan. Congratulations to both of you on your election victories. It's hard work, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about that work as we have our conversation today. And I'd like to start with what campaigning was like for both of you. Back in the day when I first got involved in local politics, running for city council campaigns for city council, were basically canvassing door to door and lawn signs and maybe a few coffees. So I'd like to hear how campaigns have changed, if any. Matt, we'll start with you. You won your race in the March primary before the pandemic. So what was your campaign like? How was it different from what I've just described?
Yeah, thanks, Terry, and thanks for having us on. Probably not too different from what you remember because we were campaigning pre-pandemic. So I had the privilege of spending 10 months out in the neighborhoods, literally every day, knocking on doors and having thousands of conversations with voters face to face on their doorstep. We also invested pretty heavily in house parties. As we went neighborhood by neighborhood, we would identify supporters and ask them if they'd be willing to host a small event in their living room or backyard with their neighbors, which we found to be just a great way to meet people in the community. But I remember a lot of long days at over 100 degrees down in Almaden Valley, trudging up and down those hills. And I really, I think it's the single best preparation for representing a community. When you've had thousands of face-to-face conversations, you have a pretty good sense of where the community is at on different issues and what people's concerns and hopes are. Very lucky to get it done in the primary. I did help out on the Measure T and Measure RR campaigns for the general. So I don't want to steal David's thunder here, but I had an inside view of how campaigns are adjusting and using technology to reach people, which may be a silver lining, but I'll let David share a little more about what that's been like.
Yeah, David, let's go to you. You came in first in the March primary, but because your votes were a little bit short of 50%, your campaign continued through the November election. So what was that like?
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me too. I had the benefit of having gone through the primary, which I think was really important to lay the groundwork because despite the changes that may have occurred, hopefully temporarily in the way campaigns are run, really the important thing is meeting neighbors, going door to door, and that retail politics. And that really hasn't changed from when you first got started. I mean, the way you win elections is by meeting people and by people getting to know your vision and believing in your candidacy through those face-to-face interactions. And so I did a complete canvass of our district during the primary. We were lucky. The primary election was 1 week before things began to shut down. So we were able to run more traditional campaign, walking every precinct, building that network of volunteers and supporters in the primary really helped us get through the general election because we couldn't do house parties, we couldn't do neighborhood meet and greets, we couldn't knock on doors and talk to people face to face during the 8 months between the primary and the general election, and that really made things feel quite different. So we began to rely more on other types of communication with voters, which, as Matt mentioned, had to do with some use of technology. Social media was important. We did a lot of texting. But we did some traditional things. We had our volunteers on our campaign make 9,000 phone calls to reach voters. And we did a lot of walking, which meant literature dropping at doors. In some sense, it helped us get through the precincts faster, which meant that we actually, as a campaign, were able to pass through each targeted precinct 3 times in the general election because we weren't knocking on doors and waiting for people to answer. We could drop literature and be through many times with different pieces of literature. So, there were some pluses and minuses of the different kind of campaign, but nothing replaces that face-to-face. And I don't know how it would have been starting a campaign in the pandemic without having the benefit of having done the primary first.
Matt, do you want to go back to Measure RR and Measure, was it T you worked on? And how those campaigns worked without going door to door?
Well, sure. Just briefly, what I thought was most interesting was actually the internal operations of the campaign. On our campaign, we used my garage, and my campaign manager and field director would show up in the morning. We would check in, and then I'd head out to the neighborhoods to knock on doors. For Measure RR, for example, I would join these all-day Zoom calls where volunteers would come in and out, and it was like a virtual campaign office. We would have the campaign staff and volunteers just on the same Zoom call all day long. We would often mute ourselves so that we could make calls to voters or do our social media tasks or whatever it might be. But that virtual campaign office where people could check in at any time of day and be together while being apart as technology enables was fascinating. And I think will change. I think campaigns will be more distributed and virtual going forward, as will many aspects of our life, which is a different and longer conversation.
Yeah, let me just add one thing in that too, which was interesting on the phone banking. We had people making calls every day of the campaign. And in my head, because as somebody who's been involved in campaigns for a long time, I kept thinking, oh, I'd love to drop in and say hi to our phone bankers, but there is no more dropping in and saying hi and bringing refreshments to the phone bankers because everyone's in their own homes. Doing it virtually. And so it's a different feel for running a campaign. There's even volunteers who worked on my campaign for weeks that I still haven't met in person because of the pandemic, because we didn't have an opportunity to gather in person.
Yeah, campaigns are traditionally such a social thing for a lot of people. And a lot of that went missing. Zoom is some compensation, but you can overdose on Zoom too, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm sick of it already.
Just hold on for another 20 minutes or so, okay?
Yeah. No
well, guys, one of the other big things that was different about this election season in local politics was massive independent expenditures. Overall, for all the city council campaigns, $3 million was spent, and that used to be enough for. That was really just for two final campaigns. But that used to be enough for a whole slate of city council candidates and the mayor as well. So an awful lot of money went into this. You each raised nearly $200,000, but independent expenditures amounted to way more, $900,000 in your race, David, 2/3 from Business Against You, 1/3 from labor supporting you, less in your race, Matt, but still a lot from supporters like Carl Guardino's Innovation for Everyone, independent expenditures. So lots of money. How do you not let that kind of spending affect you, Matt?
Well, from the outset, our team discussed that as part of our strategy. That was a key strategic consideration, and we were committed to being truly independent. We went into every questionnaire meeting with local interest groups and just told them the same thing, told them what we thought about the issues and didn't try to pander. And our fundraising strategy was set up to enable us to be that independent. So we crafted a grassroots small dollar fundraising strategy that consisted of calling and emailing literally every Facebook friend I have. I mean, I was reaching out to former babysitters and elementary school teachers and my friends' parents, and just really pushing hard to get everyone in our network to make a donation. We also used those house parties. At the end of each house party, we made a soft pitch. If people liked the message and wanted to help the effort, we encouraged residents to make donations. And at the end of the day, I think we had about 700 donors. We ended up raising more than any other candidate in the primary. And more importantly, we had more individual donors and more small dollar in-district donors than my opponents combined. And so we just felt like with that independent grassroots base of fundraising, we didn't have to worry as much. But that being said, you're right. The fact that the outside groups can literally outspend candidates 3-to-1, 4-to-1 is overwhelming. It's scary, and it really, it's concerning. You have to wonder what it does to our democracy. I think we need to do more to push for transparency. There were mail pieces by outside groups in our race that forced me to then spend weeks explaining to voters that wasn't my mail piece. That wasn't my message. I didn't approve it. In fact, it's not even legal for me to talk to the group sending it about our race. And so it's frustrating. I think the answer is better transparency. People ought to know who is sending them a message, and really truly who's, the businesses, the labor unions, the individual big dollar donors ought to be fully transparent, and it needs to be even clearer that it's not coming from the candidates.
David, what about you? How do you not feel beholden to labor, and how do you not bear a grudge against the business interests that spent a lot of money on very nasty mailings and other media against you?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a tough thing when the race is over. Certainly, being successful in the campaign helps a little bit with being able to smooth over those relationships. But I knew going in, I was running against an incumbent, and I knew that meant that it was an uphill battle as far as resources and things that were going to be spent against me, and so we were prepared for that. As a campaign, what you can really do is control your own message, make sure that you're getting the positive things about yourself out, that you're differentiating yourself from your opponent, which is necessary in a race like this. But we also had to adjust as we went on, and adjust to the attacks that were being made, focus some of our advertising, our social media work, and our conversations with people on addressing the specifics of some of these attacks, because they did get traction. And we, both in the primary and in the general election, I spent the last couple of weeks of the campaign answering messages from people saying, how do you explain what was just sent to me in the mail? And we had to address those things. And I've seen some of your analysis. Certainly, I was in a good position, having been on a school board for a long time and in the community a while, and that allowed people to circle some wagons around me. And that was helpful, to have people in the community who were willing to respond independent from me, even without my prompting, and say, what you're saying doesn't make any sense based on what we know about this person. That helps a lot. It concerns me quite a bit that when you have candidates who aren't as well known or don't have that base of support, that these kinds of attacks can make a difference. And we need to figure out how, again, as Matt said, how to make this more transparent. I will say that at some point, a certain level of spending becomes too much, and I think the community gets turned off by it. So when you get 2 to 3 things in the mail every day from one side, I heard a lot of people who said, this is getting ridiculous. I'm just going to vote for the person who's not sending me 2 to 3 pieces a day. So there is going to be a balance that has to be found in terms of independent money spent.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the credit of both of you, I have to say you're exemplary candidates in that you both paid your dues in the district, working with the community over a course of years. And at least I've learned in watching local politics for a long time, that really makes a difference for a candidate. And to some extent, as David was saying, it inoculates you against the kinds of attacks that he experienced. Well, let's get back to the voters now. So you both spent a lot of time talking to voters. So I'd like to hear what you think you learned from the voters. Start with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, our community talked a lot about building a better relationship with their city council office, about having a responsive council member, responsive staff who will be a voice and advocate for their needs. And that time spent before the primary walking and talking to voters is really important. It's almost like I build a Rolodex in my head of what neighborhoods and what streets have certain issues, and it'll allow us to hit the ground running as we start our council office moving forward. But what we heard was that we have a lot of work ahead of us to rebuild that trust between the community and the council, in terms of just feeling like people are being heard, just feeling like they have somebody who's an advocate. So setting aside even any of the issues that we often talk about as candidates running for council, what we really hear from our constituents, I think primarily, is wanting that service, wanting that person who's going to be responsive to the calls that go in, to the neighborhood issues, to the day-to-day needs of residents of our community.
Good point, thank you. So Matt, you recently posted a list entitled "What I Learned Knocking on 10,000 Doors." So Tell us what you learned.
Yeah. Well, the most important thing I learned is that the conversation that some of us are having on Twitter is simply not representative of what most voters think or care about. Not that the conversations we have on Twitter aren't important, but when you personally knock on 10,000 doors, as I did, you get quite an education. Sometimes you get that education as you're being yelled out of chased out of somebody's front yard who's, mad because the same pothole has been in front of their home for 10 years. And they don't want to hear from anyone who's, quote unquote, from the government. So you learn a lot. I think similar to what David said, the overwhelming message, which I found so interesting because it was not at all ideological. It was not partisan. It was almost no invocation of party. And very little discussion of the big federal issues that we discuss ad nauseum on social media. It was that residents of San Jose want the city to deliver core services effectively and efficiently. And by core services, I mean things like emergency response, paving the roads, maintaining the parks, cleaning up the blight of trash and weeds and graffiti, good hours and programming at the libraries and community centers. And, that's been a challenge for San Jose. It's been a challenge since the Great Recession. It's also just structurally a challenge because we're a big city with a small budget due to our low ratio of jobs to housing as a bedroom community. So we don't have the resources per capita to deliver services at the level of quality that residents expect and deserve. So, I think from the perspective of the average voter, having knocked on 10,000 of their doors, I think there's a feeling that the city is still falling short around its basic core mandate of delivering those public safety, infrastructure, and other core services. And my personal hope and mission really is to try to increase accountability for delivering those services by increasing transparency, creating a greater focus on a smaller number of things, better measurement and public reporting of what we're doing, and to really try to rebuild trust with voters that and with residents broadly, that the city understands their needs and is going to deliver those services effectively and be really responsive.
Thank you. Before we completely leave the campaigns, we had a question come in from a viewer, and that is, it sounds like both of you were pretty full-time as candidates for the last year. So that's not actually a paying job. How did you survive? Start with you, David.
Well, it wasn't quite full-time. I was able to continue to do my other job. In the primary, I took I cut back to half-time officially with my job in the last 5 or 6 months. So I worked 20 hours a week at my job and then worked, on my campaign the other 20 hours. A lot of the campaigning activities are done in the morning and evening. I was able to go out and walk precincts each day while then getting back to other things. Had enough time to make the phone calls I had to make during the day and then do a lot on the weekends. It's a tough balance. It's one of those reasons why I waited to run for office until my kids were in high school and I didn't have as many other obligations with my family. But yes, there's a lot. In the general election, it was a little different. I mean, under COVID times, everything is blended together into one very strange cocktail of activities. And so, I did the campaign, I continued to do my work, but, there was no hours are almost meaningless in the current world. So I was able to somehow balance it all. And I was fortunate to be at a job that understood the importance of what I was doing and giving me some flexibility to do it.
Matt, what about you?
Well, our kids are 3 and 1, so I'm clearly not as smart as David, but it's full time on the weekends, it's evenings, it's around the clock, it's responding to email until, midnight, and you got to go to sleep to get up and work in the morning. I was very fortunate timing wise to be winding down and I had started a company called Brigade that builds tools for civic engagement. So very, very relevant to the campaign and to local government. And we were acquired in 2019. And so I waited for that to go through before announcing that I intended to run. And then I did I've been doing consulting. And so I had a fairly flexible schedule with a small number of clients and was consulting for nonprofits and startups, and was able to fit that in and build a flexible schedule. But certainly isn't easy. It's not easy with kids. It's not easy having to earn a living. And you really rely on the kindness of family and friends in particular. My mother-in-law moved in with us for a while to help with childcare, which was just an incredible privilege. So yeah, it's certainly not easy to campaign.
It's tough, but congratulations to both of you. You got through it and you won. So let's move on to what's coming next. I'm going to ask you what your top priorities are for your first year in office. Matt, we'll start with you on that. Top priorities.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think, our response to COVID just has to be priority number one for anyone in government at any level. And while the city doesn't have a public health department, we have a very important role to play in partnering with the county, which does, and providing meals and ensuring public safety amidst a pandemic. There's also an economic component to this, which is much more within the city's wheelhouse. And so, we have to think about both sides of that, supporting small businesses, trying to really translate the public health orders coming from the county and the state into practical guidelines for San Jose residents to also be able to engage with one another and engage in the local economy and go to work and earn a living and put food on the table and pay the rent. And so to me, that's priority number one. It's a crisis. And part of what that means, which I think is important and residents, need to be aware of, is focusing on that means that we have to be willing. There are trade-offs. We have limited time and other resources at City Hall. So we have to be clear with the public about what we're not doing. Obviously, your libraries are not open. And so, things like that. What are we not getting to and deferring so that we can reallocate resources to this crisis that is ongoing? And it's great that we have a vaccine coming, but it's going to take a long time to distribute it and to get back to anything resembling what normal was before the pandemic. Quickly, my other three top priorities are community engagement. I want to really focus on building out and enhancing our neighborhood associations in every neighborhood to build community and improve safety. We know that communities that are well connected are safer and provide more opportunity. Very interested in infrastructure and being, as I mentioned earlier, being brilliant at the basics of paving the roads, maintaining the parks, the kinds of local experiences of government that people have every day. And then finally, another huge issue that I heard about every day knocking on doors was homelessness. And that's a much longer, we could have a whole segment on that, of course, but it's fundamentally a housing problem for sure. We have a big imbalance between our population growth and the housing stock. But there's also the need to be more pragmatic and more aggressive in terms of government policy around mental health treatment and addiction treatment. And so I'll leave it at that. But that would be a quick summary of the top issues on my mind as I step into office.
Thanks, David. What about you? Top priorities for your first year?
I mean, for me, as I talked about before, the community feeling like they didn't have an advocate or somebody they could really work with. My first priority number one is building that service organization in our district office to really be there to provide what the services that our community is asking for, to be accessible, available, and responsive in a quick and timely manner, and to improve that responsiveness that our community is seeking. So that's really going to be the early part of my term, is making sure we have that office and that the community rebuilds that sense of trust. Beyond that, building a sense of community in our neighborhoods. Matt mentioned this as well, but I've been talking a lot with neighbors about the lack of cohesive neighborhood feeling, the lack of neighborhood associations, trying to sort of build a sense of community back in the neighborhoods of San Jose, I think is important. And then in North San Jose, we have a lot of big issues around transportation with BART in our district and the North San Jose plan being rethought. So building a robust North San Jose plan with a good sustainable development program so that we are taking advantage of the ability to have more density up there, to build more affordable housing, to build a sense of community, and to do it in an environmentally responsible way that focuses on transportation, on mass transit oriented development, including parks and trails and bike routes so that people have good ways of getting around, and also making sure that we have good environmental policies around solar and other infrastructure. So those are kind of the big things I'm focused on. Obviously, underlying all this, as Matt talked about, is recovery from COVID, which we'll have to be dealing with throughout. But I don't want to lose sight of these big issues that will continue and that we don't want to get behind on as we recover.
Okay, so as you both know, there's currently a split on the council between what might be called the mayor's moderate and relatively business-friendly 6 votes and the more labor-friendly Latinx 5. David, it's assumed you'll align with the Latinx 5 who with labor supported you. That would shift the balance on the council with 6 votes for the Latinx progressives and 5 for the mayor, assuming that's the direction in which Matt goes. Is that what you expect to happen, David?
No, my belief is that just shaking up the council with a couple other people who think differently, who have come in with a different viewpoint, will allow us to build better coalition amongst all the council members. I don't think that anybody is going to sit quietly on a group of 5 that used to exist, used to be that group of 6, and wait for, and just vote against what another group of 6 is doing. I think we're going to find ways to work together. And Matt and I think, have a lot of things in common, and we'll be able to build some policy across what I think is somewhat of an artificial divide. I think, unfortunately, there's been there were some missteps that led to a division that I think could have been avoided. And I think now that we have some new people on the council, while ideologically, I'm aligned with values that one could say are labor values, without having to sacrifice any of those values, I think we can build coalitions that won't result in closely divided votes, but will build better policy and bring more consensus to the council.
And Matt, it's assumed you'll align with the mayor. He endorsed you. Is that correct?
Well, I like what David had to say, and the bottom line, I said this over and over again in the campaign, and I very much meant it. I did not run to join a team or faction. I didn't run to join the business faction or team, the labor team, the environmental team, the bicycle coalition team, or the mayor's team. I mean, these are all important stakeholders. They're all members of the community. They all represent people with interests and with a role to play in our community, and they all should have a voice. Our job as elected officials is to make sure that the table is as big as possible, and we're hearing from all of the voices and a representative sample of voices from across the community, and then actually being able to say no to people and forge compromises. And no group should get everything they want. We've got to forge compromises that move the whole community forward. We have to get back to a more fundamental notion of the common good. I think the truth is, as David said, this is somewhat artificial. When you go knock on doors, people aren't following the council meetings. They certainly aren't interested in 12-hour meetings with, representatives personally attacking one another or questioning each other's motives. I mean, it's not constructive. And I think, on the other hand, the good news, and maybe David and I can help, bring this sensibility to the council. I really believe we more or less have the same end goals. I think we just often have different thoughts about how to get there. And if we can keep reminding ourselves that we have those common end goals and a lot of common values, I think that may open up a space to have a more constructive and data-driven conversation about which approaches are working. And let's be willing to try something and then study it and look at the data. And maybe a year or two later, we change our minds and say, well, we thought this was going to produce more housing, but it didn't. Or we thought this would bring more jobs, but it didn't. And so that's fine. I think the public actually wants that kind of radical transparency and honesty from us. And it's up to us as leaders in the city to provide it. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to bring a new mentality and kind of change the way we do business at City Hall.
On that note, I need to interrupt you because we're out of time, but I'm very optimistic about what you two can bring to the council and get everybody working together on the issues that everybody has in common. So Matt Mahan, David Cohen, thanks for being with us today, and good luck with your new jobs.
Thank
you. Thanks for having us.
We'll be back next month with further updates on Valley politics. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can catch up on all our previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org. or on YouTube by searching for Create TV San Jose. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching.